Hello learners, welcome again to our session. It's a continuation of what you are doing in relation to process costing. So in our previous class we had introduced the process costing. We went ahead and looked at some of the features and also key definitions under process costing. So in our class today, I want us to focus on the accounts, main accounts under process costing. So because we noted that at this point, this is a production costing, or rather this is a costing method whereby production is going to be undertaken on stages. So looking at this case, meaning that allow to prepare our accounts. So having that, we have to understand how do we suppose, or rather what's the format of presenting these accounts, and that should take us to accounts under process costing. So looking at the accounts under process costing, so allow me to erase here. This is what we did. So after we talked of this, I want us now to talk of main accounts under process costing, the accounts that you must always have in mind whenever we are dealing with process costing. So accounts that you must always have in mind whenever we are dealing with process costing. So number one account, of course, I should be talking of a process cost account. So we are saying that we are dealing with accounts under process costing. So these are accounts under process costing. Accounts, looking at our accounts under process costing, accounts under process costing, accounts under process costing. So looking at our accounts always, even before we start working out these questions, even before we start working out the problems for costing or for process costing, it's very important for us to understand this account known as throughput account. Throughput account. So what will this account entail? This account will give us the estimated losses that probably we can incur. So that should assist us to understand probably if we'll have either abnormal loss or abnormal gain. So looking at our throughput account, this is what we'll be having. I'll be talking of our balance brought down. Remember, we're looking of materials. Then we can talk of input. These are materials. So I should be having it at that point. Then after we are done with that, I'm going to look at our output. What do we have as our output in that case? I'll be having our figures there. Then talk of normal loss, the losses that we are anticipating to occur or to have normal loss. I'll be having our figure there. Then in this case, talk of our balance carried down. I should be having our figures there. So looking at this case, my good student, the difference that we'll be having on either, if suppose I'm having a case, in the event that you have a difference in such a case, or if you aren't given the aspect of a normal loss, or rather we aren't given the balance carried down. So we can just have our balance brought down plus input minus output and normal loss. That should give us what? Our balance carried down, the difference. And in the event probably that you have a normal or rather abnormal loss, I'll be having my abnormal loss here. And in the event that we have abnormal gain, I'll be having our abnormal gain on the debit side. Abnormal gain. So this is what we should be having as our throughput account. And remember, these are in terms of units. That is in units. That is in units. So throughput account is very important whenever we are preparing our process costing. Whenever we're preparing our process costing, it's very important for us to prepare the throughput account in regard to units. So After we are done with our throughput account, the next account will be to prepare our process cost account. Say like maybe I'm having process one account. Maybe I'm having process one account. And this is how our accounts will look like. So I'll be talking of our details here. At that point. We can also talk of our, just a moment, I know I'm in the dark. So looking at that case, just a moment. So looking at our process account as we should be having our process account being there. So we are talking of our details at this point. Then you can also talk of our units, cost per unit, amount, details, talk of our units, cost per unit, you can talk of our amount. So this is our process one account. You've termed it as process one account. You've termed it as process one account. You've termed it as process one account. So we term that as our process one account. So this is our details here. We have our units. We have our cost per unit. We have our amount here. We have our details. We have our units. We have our cost per unit. Then we have our amount here. We have our amount there. So looking at this account, what are some of the key elements that you must always have in mind? So in this case, we can talk of an example of, like maybe I'm having raw materials. So we can talk of raw materials here. Talk of raw materials. The number of units that we'll be having. The aspect of the cost per unit. Then you have our amount here, our value. Then you can also talk of maybe direct materials. Say like direct materials, the cost of direct materials added. Direct materials. We should be having our figure there, maybe cost per unit and our amount. So that is probably the input. Then you can talk of direct labor, for example. Direct labor. We can have our direct labor at that point because you don't have the number of units. We can also talk of direct expenses, any form of direct expenses. We can have our direct expenses at that point. Then after we've talked of that, we can also talk of maybe we had abnormal gain or production overheads, say like production OHDs. I can also have our production overheads here. Then you can talk of maybe abnormal gain in terms of units then we have our value per unit, then we have it there. So this is the account that we are looking at, this is the account that we are talking about, this is the account that we are talking about. So after we've talked of that, talk of our credit side. Looking at our credit, what will we be looking at? The first case we can talk of, maybe say like our output. We have the number of units there, cost per unit. We have our value there. Then you can also talk of maybe normal loss. In the event that you have our normal loss, you can have it there. Then you have our value, then you have it there. Also another element to talk about at this point, maybe you can talk of abnormal loss. Abnormal loss here. We have it, we have it, we have it there. So that as at the end of the day, my good students, as at the end of the day, this account of ours should be a self-balancing account. This account of ours should be a self-balancing account. Should be a self-balancing account. So of course I'll be having our figures here. I'll be having our figures here. So that as at the end of the day, we are saying our account should be a self-balancing account. Should be a self-balancing account. So this is a process account format. This is a process account format. You can either have output here, or we can transfer, say like to the next process, maybe transfer to process 2. We can also have that detail here. So after you've looked at process 1 account, before anything else, there are some key elements that I want us to understand. There are some key elements that I want us to understand. You see this output here. How will you determine the value of this output? How will you determine the value of this output? Cost per unit. The cost per unit. So determination of the value, or rather cost per unit, determination of cost per unit. Determination of cost per unit. The cost per unit of our output, the one that I've marked with red here. How will you determine that figure? You will not always be given directly. It will always be upon you to determine that figure. And when it comes to determine that figure, how will you go about it? So to determine that figure, ideally we'll always be talking of the total process cost. We'll always be talking of the total process cost. Total process cost. That is total process cost to account for. Total process cost to account for. Total process cost to account for. We are going to divide by the good output units. These are the output units. We are looking at the good, because remember, output, we can also have some of either the aspect which were discarded. So looking at this case, we are talking of the total process cost to account for. We divide by the total, or rather we divide by the output units. In this case, the total cost, you see here, if we sum all this should give us our total cost. If we sum all this should give us our total cost. And talk of our output units. Talk of our output units. Alternatively, in the event that you have scrap, in the event that you have your normal loss, cost per unit for normal loss, cost per unit. We'll always be talking of this. We'll always be talking of this. We'll be looking at a case whereby I'm dealing with the aspect of the total process cost. Total process cost with less the scrap. Remember, we had talked of the scrap earlier on. Scrap for normal loss. Scrap for normal loss. We are going to divide. We are going to divide by input units. Input units minus normal loss units. Minus normal loss units. Still, that can also give us what? Our cost per unit. That can also give us our cost per unit. That will also give us our cost per unit. So that is one way of, or rather this is how we can determine the cost per unit here. That is how we can determine the cost per unit at this point. That's how we can determine the cost per unit at that point. So after we've talked of that, another account probably to consider, we can talk of like abnormal loss account and normal abnormal gain account. So looking at this case, that should give us, we can also talk of abnormal loss and abnormal gain account. So looking at abnormal loss account, start with abnormal loss account. Start with abnormal loss account. So now we're talking of abnormal loss account, ideally, what should we have in mind? Abnormal loss account, this is what we'll be talking about. Maybe I'll be talking of our talk of our maybe details, talk of our units, talk of cost, value. So having this case, so abnormal loss at any given point, whenever I'll be having that, I will always take it in our P&L as a loss, as our expense. So having that case, this is what we should go with, this is what we're going to consider. These are our costs, or rather these are our units. Take them as our units. We have our cost per unit. We have our value. This is our units, cost. Maybe I'm having our value there. So in this case, what we should be having, I'm going to have our process, either process 1 or process 2, process account, loss, where that loss has come from. Like in this case, talk of abnormal loss, assuming we've we've credited our process 1 account. We've credited our process 1 account, meaning that I'm going to debit our abnormal loss account with a value there, And after we've done that, I'm going to transfer the value of abnormal loss account to our P&L as what? As expense. And in that case, what you are going to do, I'm going to credit our P&L account. I'm going to debit our P&L account, and we credit what? Our abnormal loss account. So first thing first, whenever we are talking of transferring, or rather whenever we are talking of recording abnormal loss account, we are going to, as we've done here, we are going to credit the process account and we debit abnormal loss account. Transfer that to P&L. To transfer the value of abnormal loss, you are going to credit your abnormal loss account and you debit your P&L. And whenever our P&L is debited, that one will always be our expense. So that is what you are going to do in relation to what? Abnormal loss account. The same case will happen when we'll be looking at abnormal gain account. The same case will happen when we'll be looking at abnormal gain account. So talk of abnormal gain account, abnormal gain account. Remember we had looked at this earlier on. I'd given you the definition of all this. So looking at that case, the same procedure will apply, the same procedure will apply, the same procedure will apply here. So I'm having our details. So the same procedure will apply on this. So the same procedure will apply on this, whereby I'll be looking at our units. So just a moment so that you view that. So I'll be looking at our process account here, talk of our units. Maybe I'm having our cost, we have our value there. I'm having units, we have our cost, we have our value there. So looking at that case, talk of now, this is gain, meaning that is what had anticipated to have as a loss, but we didn't have. So in our details here, I'm going to debit our process account. We are going to debit our process account, which we've done it here. After debiting our process account, you are going to credit. So our abnormal gain account. So this is process account with the value that we have there, Then transfer it to P&L account. We are going to credit our P&L and you debit our abnormal gain account. So this is P&L account. So we are debiting our abnormal gain and we are crediting our P&L account. All this should be self-balancing account. All that should be self-balancing account. All this should be self-balancing account. So basically, these are some of the main accounts that we normally look at whenever we are looking at process costing. Whenever we are talking of our process costing, these are the main accounts that we normally talk about. So in that case, that will bring us to the end of this class of looking at our process accounts. So in our next class, now we'll proceed and handle an illustration question. So that whenever we have any question for process account, it should be very simple for us. To that juncture, thank you so much and let us meet in the next session. Thank you.